there, this is Underwear Guy, and today I'm doing something quite different, which is talking about an underwear costume idea. People have seen some of these before and asked where I bought them, and I always have to answer that, well, they're not bought off the shelf. These costumes are usually assembled or put together with a variety of items, some of them bought and then some of them crafted and sewn together or cut together, or just all sorts of different ideas and pieces put together through handcrafting. This is a fairly simple one. This is the Spider-Man underwear outfit, and it's based mostly on the Amazing Spider-Man movie from last year, just about last year, I believe. And this is going to be a combination of a review and also some craft tips and tricks which you could apply for any kind of costume. It doesn't matter if it's for a party or for Halloween. I thought I would do this because I know the Halloween holiday is coming up pretty soon here. This is not meant to be a super durable, wear every year kind of costume. You would probably get into more heavy-duty sewing and handcrafting to do that. So it depends. You'll have to think about what techniques and how much you want to get out of your particular costume idea. And you don't have to actually go verbatim for what I'm talking about here. You could do some different ideas, throw different types of underwear in. Obviously, the thong is a very revealing one, so I'm not sure you would want to wear this costume in public. You could definitely modify it and wear a different kind of underwear type with it. And I'm just going to talk about that because that's what I did in this photo. So to start things off, probably the biggest element is the mask. And I found a whole variety of Spider-Man masks, mostly through Amazon because it was easier just to do searches on there, but you could go into any kind of store, both brick and mortar and then online, and find different mask ideas. This is the Deluxe Spider-Man mask by Disguise. That's the company name. And it's definitely much better than the cheaper one. This one retails for about $30. I think the cheaper one is more like half that price, maybe $15. They range depending on where you buy them. And the deluxe version has just nicer detailing and a lot more realism. It's still relatively cheap construction. It's not certainly like a movie replica costume. It just depends again on how much you're wanting to invest. I think some of the big things that I would highlight are the surface texturing, and you can see, thankfully because my lighting is showing it off, there is a relief texture, so this is not just printed flat. There's actually, the webbing has some texture to it that stands out from the surface. The eye lenses are actually part of the plastic reinforcement shell underneath, and that really is a big part of why this costume works from the mask perspective, because the shell helps provide all of that finish and surface volume that you need to make it look more like the movie. The way that you put this on is you can unzip it in the back, so there's a zipper right here that stays fairly well hidden. And I would say, again, because this isn't, $30 for this much of a costume element is pretty cheap, and I'm not going to unzip it all the way. You can definitely tell there's some flimsiness to it. Like, I would be very concerned about doing this too many times. I think the zipper will come undone and probably rip apart eventually. This material is really just some sort of synthetic blend. I'm not sure if I'm going to actually find out what it's made out of. I could check. There's a big tag, as you can see here. So the coating is 100% acrylic, and then the material is 89% polyester, 11% spandex. But it's super thin and it's quite fragile. So again, this isn't meant to be a rough and tumble kind of costume. But again, it works if you're just doing it for a party or something fun, like a photo. And this is an officially licensed product, as you can see, from the Amazing Spider-Man movie. It's something that I'm going to actually see if I can, how far I can unzip this, just so you can actually, so I said I wasn't, but now I'm realizing it would be really helpful for you to be able to see the interior. So I think that's as far as it'll go. And now you can kind of see the shell. It's a very thin plastic. It's, again, not super detailed, but it does the job. And yes, you can see out of it. Your vision, though, is surprisingly obscured. So that's the funny thing, in that I'm not sure if you could really walk around. You'd have to take this off and then put it back on for periods of time. And I will tell you, even from just wearing it for a few minutes for a photo, it's super hot. You will swelter in this hood. It doesn't breathe because it's all almost plastic polyester fabric. So watch out for that. And I'm just setting your expectations. It does look pretty good though once it's on. So it's kind of how much you're going to sacrifice for your art and for the opportunity to wear the costume. You can see the lens looks pretty good. Again, it's a flimsy plastic. I can dent it in with my finger, but it does look pretty good. To go with it, the other big piece of the element that I think makes the costume work are the gloves, and these are also by Disguise. You have to be really careful when you order them that you're getting the deluxe adult version, because they look exactly the same, but there's a kids version, and the sizing, of course, is totally different for adults and kids, and you'll be super disappointed if you wanted to get the adult size gloves and you end up with kids versions that will never fit. And these unfortunately don't match up from the sense that this has a cool kind of sheen to it with the coating, and these do not, so it's a matte spandex. Interestingly, this fabric feels a little more durable, but you do have to watch out. This stitching is pretty flimsy, and if you're not careful putting these on, it will pop a seam, and you'll have to either fix it or just be really careful with it. So again, not super durable, but I will say the printing is very detailed, and if you're talking about something where, short of making this by hand, it's really a pretty nice piece of costume accessory that I do think works really well. The other element that I should add is that these are probably sized for not super big hands. You will find that they will get pretty tight pretty fast. So it just kind of depends. I mean, you'll know if you're more slender along your arm. It stretches to some degree, but you can see with these fingers, the way they're designed, they're not for really large hands, particularly really thick fingers. Something the costume will do is along the upper part of the arm. How do you prevent it from kind of rippling and sliding back down is probably a question that some of you would have. And there's a couple different things you can do. The main one that I would highlight is to actually use some sort of adhesive, and this is going to probably make you laugh, but I looked around and you can actually buy something called fashion tape, and it's safe for your skin, and it'll apply to both the fabric side and then directly to your skin. So obviously this is a temporary measure, but it's used for any time you have to worry. You can see they're highlighting it here for women about how to prevent something from inadvertently giving a show, and it does work. You probably don't want to apply long strips all the way around. You'd want to do like small strips so that the fabric doesn't get all wrinkled and bunched up, because it's not going to stretch like the normal fabric would, because this is just regular. It's really literally like adhesive tape, but with a little bit of a kind of more medical grade type. So that's a good side tip for any kind of costume element that you're doing, and you need it to stay on and not be falling down, particularly if it's like something on your legs or on the gauntlet of these gloves. To get the small leg straps, the color-coded leg straps, that was really simple. All I did was actually take, at the time, they were Nike compression shorts, boxer brief, and then I just cut the legs off. And depending on the length, here as another example, I just have this Under Armour. I got these today, an Under Armour box brief, and you could get more length out of it. I recommend, especially because you're not talking about the fit of the waist, if you're just going to use them for the leg strap, that you get a size smaller than you normally would to help these from staying on and not falling off. Combine that with the tape and you should be pretty good. If you're talking about how to cut these in a nice clean line so you don't have to worry about either re-sewing or stitching down the edges, I really recommend, number one, that you measure a straight line for evenness on both that you're going to cut, and in general, the best way to lay down a line that you're going to cut is to use a marking pencil for fabric, because if you just try to use a regular pencil, it probably isn't going to work. And these have a special formulation that really shows up well on darker fabrics. You can get these at any craft store / fabric store. They're pretty common. But use a straight edge, mark your line, and then the second tip, besides getting the marker pencil down, is don't use scissors, because if you cut with scissors, as you cut, you're going to create a really jagged line unless you do a super careful, precise motion with the scissors, which is pretty hard. So the other piece of equipment that really will help you when you're doing any kind of cutting of fabric, especially if you're trying to cut through 2 layers at once, which you would be here, is to use a rotary cutter. And this is just, they're all pretty much the same. They are very sharp, so you do have to be careful. and you can see here I just pull that back and then you can run this along. Generally you want to have a straight edge down while you cut. Just be careful not to run this over your fingers, because obviously it's super sharp and somewhat dangerous, but it works a lot better. It gives you a very clean edge, and on fabrics like spandex, which don't really fray, that kind of saves you from having to finish them. If you have to do any kind of fold over edge like a hem, and you don't want to be sewing, there's a couple options for fabrics that you can iron, and that wouldn't necessarily be these kinds of spandex fabrics, but let's say you have something like a cotton blend or a synthetic fabric that can take to some heat. Just so you know, there's something called fusible web, which is just this synthetic kind of material that comes in a spool. There are different widths, just like tape, but you can pin that down and fold the fabric over and then iron it, and it will stay fairly well sealed. I mean, it won't last forever, but through most wearing conditions, it actually does a really good job. And that's better than gluing, because if you glue, it's going to cause a lot of distortion of the fabric, because the glue will penetrate into the fibers of the material, and whereas this one is going to be a little cleaner on the edge. The only downside is, again, this doesn't necessarily stretch a whole lot, so you might cut it up into little pieces and kind of go along the way so that you can maintain some areas that will still stretch. The other option when you're trying to bond fabric together without necessarily doing a lot of complicated sewing is you can actually use adhesive tape, but this is double-faced for fabric. And again, you can get both of these from any normal craft fabric store. So this is another method if you're trying to piece together fabric from different outfits or different materials without having to do too much sewing. For the top, you can just take any regular compression shirt. Generally, I recommend a size smaller than you normally wear, unless it's a super tight spandex compression shirt. Here, this isn't the one from the photo at the time. That was a Nike top, but I couldn't find the same one this time around, so I ended up just finding this Under Armour shirt. You do notice, of course, you have to deal with this logo, and quite frankly, depending on what you're going to do, you can just simply turn this inside out, and that'll work just as well. You might trim off the edges of the collar. It just kind of depends on what you're doing. There obviously wasn't a lot in this costume, so depending on what you wanted, you can either keep the full shirt, which would be a good way to kind of tone down the reveal of the costume, or you can cut it up obviously higher, and you just have to make sure you don't cut it up past the armhole here, because otherwise the whole thing will just fall apart and then it won't stay on in any form. So my point is to be creative in terms of shopping. You don't have to get the exact items shown here or in the photo. You can change it and modify it, but I'm just showing you sort of the general direction of what you can take. Now, the centerpiece, from my point of view, is of course the underwear, and you have a whole lot of options. I like some of the Greg Home underwear because the branding is really minimal. It's just this little logo tag here, so that you don't have to have some big exposed waistband that kind of ruins the look, because normally any superhero is not going to have a giant underwear label costume along the waist. Now, the color was the other reason, and the shine of this fabric. It went well with everything in terms of creating a cohesive palette, and as you can see, it worked out that all these colors matched up, so I didn't have to do any dyeing or painting of the fabrics later. That was really convenient and kind of lucky. I actually bought a couple different ones, one from the Charged line, and this is what they call the Boy Toy line, and you can still buy these, I believe. And luckily for those of you who obviously don't want to necessarily have this minimal cut with the thong, there are other cuts with a full brief style, and I have to check, but I think there's a couple other, there might even be a square cut or a boxer brief style in a similar fabric. It might not be the same line because Greg Home does reuse these materials. But you can also just pick anything. Like Joe Snyder has a lot of underwear that doesn't have a exposed waistband, and there's a whole range of colors, and you can match up pretty close to what you're looking for. You can, instead of going with blue, you could go with red. So there's a whole lot of options. You just want to be creative. I do recommend a spandex type fabric or something synthetic that kind of matches the finish. Spandexman.com has a whole lot of custom order briefs and square cuts that you can get in your own color spandex. So those are other options. You don't have to necessarily go with what I showed in the photo. And of course, like I said, you could just go with this Under Armour brief. This actually happens to match up pretty well. The only challenge is you're dealing with the exposed waistband in this one. And theoretically, you could probably just wear it with the waistband folded down and using, like I showed you, the fusible web, or probably more likely some of the tape. You could probably tack it down. It just kind of depends on the look you're going for. And you'd want to do something more elaborate if you were trying to make a really high-end costume. Maybe what you could do, for example, is you could trim this and then get a regular elastic and then sew that down so that you had more of a regular, truly functional waistband. And you might do something else for modesty, like lining the front, because, honestly, if you're just wearing this out, this is definitely going to show. This is a super thin fabric, and it's, as you can see, almost see-through. So definitely for the daring, depending on where you're going or what you're doing, or if you're just having fun, then it's okay. The last piece that I thought I would mention that I didn't do in the photo, but if I'm giving you just all sorts of tips and ideas, you can see here that they printed, obviously, this pattern which has the dots and then the lines, and you can apply to any fabric these 3D fabric paints, and you can buy these again at craft stores. They're pretty common. And here's just an example of a black and red. So if you wanted to take this shirt, it would be take a little time, but you know what? That's the point of making a costume. And you could draw out your lines. You probably want to think about it, and you could use the marking pen beforehand, because this will actually wash off, versus these are permanent once they dry. And draw your lines to kind of match and blend everything together. And this will have, the cool thing about why I wanted to point these out, instead of painting flat, these will actually have some sort of relief to them. They'll actually have a texture which would match well with the mask element. So those are just some ideas about how you can combine items you buy off the shelf, do your own bit of construction and crafting, and then come together with a fun costume. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on email or on Twitter or through Facebook. I'm on there as well. And until next time, this is Underwear Guy with the Spider-Man underwear costume.